productivity aside, I've noticed I will schedule out a whole day, which might include, breaking for dinner, post
Yep.
dinner work, blah, 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 blah. And I've just noticed like, man, if anything else happens, like I
Yeah,
decide to
exactly.
clean my kitchen,
Right.
I start to feel not
Mhm.
terrible, but I'm like, this sucks.
All right, we're live.
Sweet. Nice.
What was our goal? Was to talk about calendars and time management, right?
Yes.
Cool.
I'll pull up my calendar here too. Perfect.
I will share my screen. So I think one of the most important things to recognize is that there's a difference between retroactively logging your time and proactively budgeting your time. Retroactively logging is just a really good thing to get in the habit of. The other thing that it helps with is with recognizing the difference between perceived cost and real cost. You might block off 6 hours to write a document because you're like, oh man, it's such a huge task. And then you actually do it and it took 30 minutes. Getting that practice of retroactively seeing how far off you were in predicting these things, it really helps with being able to budget your time in the future. Proactive calendaring, it's where the most value is, and it's also the hardest for people to get used to, because there are many ways to do it well and there are many ways to do it poorly. One of the failure modes is when people don't quantize things. They'll say, yeah, I'm going to block off this time here for task A, task B, task C, and they just put all of these things in this section here, and
Right.
you don't really have visibility on how much time each of those things will take. So really the correct answer is, all right, task A takes this much time, task B takes this much time, and task C takes this much time. And it's just your best guess. And you can see actually this block didn't make any sense because I was consolidating all of these things. Another common failure mode is overloading the amount of time that you have allocated. So I have all of this blocked off for Thanksgiving. I'm not going to be doing really any scheduled work, but let's assume that I was going to fill out this day. I know I have to do about this much time in email. A failure mode is people say, well, I'm going to do task A here. I'm going to do task B here. I'm going to do task C here. And they fill up all their time with tasks. And then they do the same thing for the next day and the next day and the next day. But the reality is that you need slack in the system because things will come up. And so I would say a good rule of thumb is to be basically 50% capacity. So let's say you're allocating this day. So a better way to do it would be say, I know I have this amount of overhead processing. I know I have this much email, and I know I'm going to have to do 2 more hours of email here. I'm just going to block this. So like blocked for deep work, and just nothing can interrupt that. This doesn't mean you can't add things to it. In fact, it means you should, but you shouldn't try to over allocate it. A good rule of thumb is like, what's the one thing you need to do that day? Task A is going to take 2 hours. It's the one thing. On Thursday, you might also have a deep work block, and it's really bad when you get in a situation where you've over allocated yourself and then these things cascade into future days. It's way easier to do the opposite, which is you finish task A and you're like, oh, it only took 30 minutes. I'm going to move in task B and do it early. You can always add things in. It's really hard to bump things out because these things just like cascade into problems. I personally get really distracted by things that I don't have sufficient warning for. So I actually have my EA from Athena do this for me automatically. And you can, by the way, have your EA do this as well. I have LJ block off my calendar 2 days in advance. So basically today, she'll block off Saturday and Sunday all day. Saturday, she's going to go forward 2 days, which is Sunday and Monday. She's basically going to put blocked here so that nothing can be scheduled there. And she's going to put blocked here. So she's going to block off all of the open times in my calendar so that things don't show up unexpectedly. I block off in advance anything that is project debt or any kind of overhead. So the common thing for that would be email. Email for me or communication is something that I know I have to spend at least 3 hours per day on, or I fall desperately behind very quickly. And so if you see my future weeks, every day I have 4 hours blocked off for email. And so when I think, oh, okay, I'm going to add a new task here, I know that I now have to say, okay, well, that fits in there, that fits in here. So I really only have 2 or 3 hours available this day to get work done. For some people, it's like, if you don't have a phone call, it means that you mentally think the time is free, but it's actually not. For me, I have these scheduled weekly on Mondays, so it shows up every week. A great example of this is I'll jump to Josh's calendar. So Josh has forum prep in here every week on Friday, because this is what he knows he needs to do. So he just blocks off this time every week, and he's reserved this time for deep work. And here it's like monthly hardware update build process. And this is the only thing he has for this whole deep work block. So he's blocking off this time, but he's only filling it with like one item. What's the one big thing you need to do that day? The other really nice thing about proactive scheduling, Miz does this really well, where you can see proactively what his schedule is. So like, if I have questions for Miz of like, when is the privacy policy going to be finalized or whatever it is, usually I can go into Miz's calendar and I can see like, oh, this is when he's doing that. Oh, okay, he's editing the comp philosophy on Monday. So I don't need to reach out to him and say like, hey, how soon are you going to be able to do that? I can just see it's right there. If I say, I wonder when he's doing that thing, it's like, oh man, that's scheduled for December 5th. That's way too late. I need to reach out to Miz and say, hey, Miz, I need you to bump this thing here and do this thing instead, because this is much more higher priority. And that just leads to better transparency and communication on that. I used to try to rely on calendar event notifications, but the problem is that they're not noisy enough. So I highly recommend setting alarms for your meetings. Before I go to bed, the first thing I do is I look at my calls for the next day and I set alarms for them. I'll set an alarm for 8, 8:30, 9, 9:30, 10, and 10:30. This is like a simple quality of life thing, but it really does reduce anxiety where you're not constantly checking the time. Like, oh, I have a call in 5 minutes. I never have to do that. It's like, oh, my alarm's going off. I wonder why. It's like, oh, I have a call with Tony. That's literally what happened just now, by the way. I was listening to the podcast and my alarm went off. It's like, oh, what am I doing right now? Oh, call with Tony. It allows me to stay present in whatever it is that I'm doing. And I don't have this thing in the back of my mind always nagging me of like, do I have a call right now? When's my next call? Is it now? Is it in 10 minutes? I hope I don't miss it. So one of the other things that a lot of people don't know about is for anyone within the Levels organization, you can go into your other calendars here, press plus, subscribe to a calendar, and I can just type in Tony at Levels Health and request access. And so you'll get a notification that I requested access to your calendar, and you can then grant me access, and then it shows up here. And then I can see your calendar and we can talk about it if needed. So a couple hotkeys that are really helpful is you press W is for week view.
Okay.
Yep. Press M for month and W for week. And then press T for today. And that jumps you to today.
Oh, that's great.
N goes to next week. I think maybe P goes to previous week. Yep, those are hotkeys that I use, I don't know, hundreds of times a day.
Oh, that's awesome. Love it.